All right, so we're diving into Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Oh, this is a good one.
I'm excited to unpack some of his big ideas with you,
Hmm.
see if we can, apply some of that wisdom
Yes.
to level up our own lives a bit.
I think what always gets me with Covey is that he's not about, like, those surface level, self-help hacks.
Right.
He's really trying to get at those deeper principles, right? The
Right.
principles that drive how we behave, how we see the world, how we interact with people.
Okay, so to even begin to understand Covey, we have to talk about paradigms.
Yeah.
I know that's like a core concept for him. You can't really get into his work without wrapping your head around that.
Right, right. And he uses that classic optical illusion. I think you've probably seen it. The one where it's like an old woman or a young woman.
Oh, yeah.
You can only see one at a time, right?
Right.
And he says that's kind of how paradigms work. They're like those lenses shaping our perception of, well, everything.
It's so true. That's why I love that example. It makes it so clear how easy it is to get stuck in one way of seeing things. You know what I mean?
Totally.
And that's where that whole paradigm shift comes in. I think that's what he's arguing, that real change, like transformative change, requires that shift in those underlying mental models that we're carrying around.
Absolutely. And I think he even says that a lot of those like little tweaks to our behavior or attitude, they don't work because we're not addressing those deeper, like those root level paradigms.
It's not just about a new time management trick.
Exactly.
Something much deeper.
Yeah, and he even talks about the character ethic versus the personality ethic and really stressing that lasting success, real success, comes from those principles of character, not just like techniques to try and manipulate other people. It's about like a way of being, not just a set of things you do.
Okay, but in real life,
Yeah.
sometimes, those techniques are kind of tempting.
Right.
How does this actually play out?
Well, Covey shares this really, I think, relatable story about struggling with his son's behavior. And he was trying all these different techniques to kind of like fix the problem.
Right.
But nothing seemed to be working.
I bet it wasn't that simple. What was he missing?
I think he realized after a lot of reflection that deep down, like his perception of his son was the problem.
Oh, wow.
He had this kind of underlying belief that his son was somehow inadequate. So even though he was using all the quote-unquote right techniques, they weren't coming from a place of genuine understanding. It was kind of like coming from a place of judgment.
That's really powerful because it makes you think about, maybe sometimes we're applying those right solutions, but to the wrong problem.
Absolutely. And I think that's why he's so adamant that we've got to align our actions with our deepest values and perceptions.
Right.
If those things are out of whack, we're just going to keep running into those deeper, like, root issues.
And this is making me think of another key concept from Covey, that PBC balance. He uses that analogy of the a goose that lays the golden eggs.
Right. I love that.
Yeah, it's so simple, but it really, gets the point across.
It's brilliant.
The P, right, stands for production. That's the results. That's what we want. The PC is our production capability. It's the system or the asset that is producing those results.
Yeah, like you can think of the goose as representing our ability to produce the results. Our skills, our relationships, our health.
All that stuff.
All those things that allow us to achieve, right?
Yeah.
But Covey's point is we can't just focus on squeezing out as many golden eggs as possible. We got to take care of that goose,
Yeah.
Invest in those capabilities.
Otherwise, we're going to end up with a dead goose and no more golden eggs.
Exactly.
And he has those great examples in the book, like the machine, you overuse the machine and it breaks down. Or the parent that's so focused on their kid's room being spotless that they end up damaging the relationship.
Yes. And that example really hits home for a lot of people. It's like we get so fixated on the short-term results that we forget about that long-term, sustainability.
Right. And it makes you think about your own life, what are my golden eggs? And am I taking care of that goose?
That's the question, isn't it?
Now, Covey, he breaks down those 7 habits, right?
Sure.
He calls the first 3 private victories.
Yes.
And they're all about developing self-mastery, moving from dependence to independence.
It's like laying that inner foundation for effectiveness.
Right. And the first habit, be proactive, I feel like that kind of sets the tone for everything else.
It really does.
He uses that example of Viktor Frankl's experiences in a concentration camp.
Oh, powerful example.
I mean, talk about horrific circumstances, right? But even there, Frankl found a way to choose his response.
And I think Covey's point is we always have a choice in how we respond to anything. It's just that we don't always realize it.
So we can choose to be proactive instead of
Yeah.
just reactive.
Exactly. Like, instead of letting external events dictate how we feel,
Right.
we can choose a more empowered, intentional response.
He talks about the circle of influence versus the circle of concern.
Yes.
That idea that proactive people focus their energy on what they can actually control, their circle of influence.
Rather than worrying about all those things outside their control.
And that feels super relevant today.
Right.
With like so much uncertainty, so much chaos in the world. It's so easy to get caught up in that stuff.
Absolutely. And I think Covey would say that focusing on our circle of influence is where we find true freedom.
Interesting. Okay, let's talk about habit 2. Begin with the end in mind. This one always feels a bit, a bit morbid to me, but also incredibly thought-provoking.
It's definitely powerful.
Yeah, that whole funeral visualization exercise, like, whoa.
I know, it's intense. But it makes you think, right?
It does. Because imagining your own funeral and thinking about what you want people to say about you, that really forces you to define what actually matters.
It helps you get clear on your values, and then you can start living each day with that end in mind. And Covey says, everything is created twice. First in our minds, then in the physical world. So if we start with a clear vision of where we want to go, we become the creators of our own lives.
He also talks about re-scripting, actively changing those ineffective scripts or paradigms that we've inherited. It's almost like rewriting your own story,
Yeah.
And he uses that example of Anwar Sadat.
Oh, incredible example.
After years of animosity toward Israel, he chose to change his beliefs. Deeply ingrained beliefs, mind you, and ultimately negotiated a peace treaty.
Pretty powerful example of how changing our internal paradigms, like our beliefs about the world, can lead to real change out there in the world.
Okay, let's tackle habit 3. Put first things first. Time management. Ugh.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us struggle with this one.
Yeah.
And Covey introduces that time management matrix. It's a great tool.
It is.
But like in real life, with our crazy busy schedules, how do we actually make it work?
Well, the matrix is all about organizing tasks based on their urgency and importance.
Right, 4 quadrants.
Exactly. And he says that quadrant 2, the one with activities that are important but not urgent, that's where the magic happens.
But that's also the quadrant. That's the easiest to ignore.
It is, because it doesn't feel as pressing.
Right, like those urgent tasks, those always feel like they need to be done, right now.
Right. So it takes real discipline to prioritize those quadrant 2 activities, things like long-term planning or personal development or relationship building, even though they don't have that same sense of urgency.
This is where his example of learning to say no to good things so that he could say yes to the best things really comes into play.
Absolutely. And I think that's a crucial part of it, right? Being able to say no. It's about being really intentional with our time and energy.
Not just reacting to whatever pops up.
Exactly. It's about proactively creating the life that we want.
So it's not really about time management. It's about managing ourselves.
I think that's a great way to put it.
Right? Aligning those actions with our values and priorities. And Covey says this is like that 4th generation approach to time management. It's all about empowering us to live that principle-centered life.
Yeah, it's about aligning those actions with our values and priorities.
Okay, so we've covered the first 3 habits, those private victories, all about, that inner work, that foundation of self-mastery and independence. Ready to move on to those public victories, the habits that help us build those effective, interdependent relationships.
Let's do it. I'm excited to see how Covey applies those principles to our interactions with others.
All right, so we're getting into public victories, right?
Yeah.
The habits that are all about building those better relationships. And honestly, I think this is where a lot of us struggle.
Oh, for sure.
It's one thing to work on yourself. But then you bring in all these other people, all those dynamics.
It gets messy.
Yeah, it's a whole other level of challenge.
Totally. Yeah. And that's why I think these next few habits are so important. They really give us this framework for creating win-win situations, communicating better, and really tapping into that power of, true collaboration.
Okay, habit 4. Think win-win. I think this is probably one of Covey's most well-known ideas, but I've always wondered, is it really always possible? Are there just some situations where, someone has to win and someone has to lose?
I mean, that's a good question. And Covey does say win-win isn't always going to work, but he's really clear that having no deal as an option, that's actually a key part of the whole win-win thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because if you're not willing to walk away from a deal that's not serving both sides,
Right.
you're probably going to end up with some kind of compromise that doesn't really make anyone happy.
Yeah, it's like settling for something that's not really good for anyone. So yeah, having that no deal option, it kind of gives you that leverage to really go for a solution that actually benefits everyone involved.
It's about collaboration, not competition.
Totally. And Covey even breaks win-win down into these like 5 dimensions: character, relationships, agreements, supportive systems, and processes. He's saying you need all of them to create a real win-win culture.
So it's not just about like one negotiation. It's about this bigger way of approaching, I don't know, all our interactions.
It's a mindset.
Yeah. And it makes me think about that abundance mentality that Covey talks about, like that belief that there's enough for everyone, that, one person's success doesn't have to come at the expense of someone else's.
Yeah, such a contrast to that scarcity mentality where it's all like competition and fear, Like there's only so much to go around.
Right.
And I think when you operate from that scarcity mentality, you're always fighting for like a bigger piece of that limited pie.
Right.
But when you embrace abundance, it opens up so much more possibility. You can focus on creating more opportunities for everyone.
And it's interesting because it goes back to what you were saying earlier about like Covey emphasizing being overdoing.
Yeah.
Right. It feels like that abundance mentality. It's a big part of that being.
It is. It's almost like a way of seeing the world.
Right. That allows for that win-win to even be possible.
Exactly. Your beliefs and your attitudes, they really shape how you approach everything and everyone.
Okay. Habit 5. Seek first to understand, then to be understood.
Oh, this one's huge.
Yeah. And I feel like, especially today, with all the communication breakdowns that we're seeing everywhere, this one seems super relevant.
Absolutely. And honestly, it's probably one of the most challenging habits to really master.
Yeah. Why is that?
Because it requires us to like shift our focus. It's not about us. It's about the other person.
It's really listening, not just, waiting for our turn to talk.
Right. Exactly. And Covey says that so often we try to like jump in with solutions or advice or, whatever.
Oh, yeah, we do.
Before we even really understood what the other person's going through.
Yeah. All right. It's like we're so eager to fix things that we forget to just like listen and actually connect with, where the other person is coming from.
And those missed opportunities, they can really damage relationships.
Yeah, that's true. But Covey does give us some like concrete tools for developing those empathic listening skills, right?
Yes. He talks about mimicking content, rephrasing content, reflecting feeling, and then kind of combining that rephrasing and reflecting feeling. It's about like slowing down, making sure you're really getting the other person before you jump in with your own 2 cents.
Okay, so it's not just this vague idea of like be a better listener. There are actual things you can do.
Exactly.
Okay, habit 6, synergize. This one's always kind of intrigued me, that idea of like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. But how do you actually make that happen? It sounds almost like magical.
It does a bit, doesn't it? But I think it comes down to like creating a space where people feel safe to share their ideas, where differences are seen as valuable and everyone's committed to like finding the best solution, not just my solution.
I remember Covey talking about an experience he had in a classroom where these students, they were all working on individual assignments, but then they kind of unexpectedly started building on each other's ideas.
Oh, cool.
And it turned into something way more innovative than anything they could have come up with on their own. It was like this like spark of creativity that happened. They were all like connecting in this meaningful way.
I love that. And I think that spark, it's more likely to happen when we can like shift away from that either thinking and embrace the and, instead of seeing differences as obstacles, we start seeing them as opportunities.
So it's moving from competition to collaboration, from seeing limitations to seeing possibilities.
Exactly.
Okay, habit 7, sharpen the saw. This feels almost like the culmination of all the other habits.
Yeah, it's that reminder to take care of ourselves so we can keep being effective.
Refill the well.
Exactly.
And Covey says we need to renew ourselves in 4 dimensions: physical, spiritual, mental, and social emotional. He says if you neglect any of those, it undermines everything else.
It's like a holistic approach to well-being, recognizing that our physical health, our emotional state, our mental clarity, our spiritual connection, they're all interconnected.
Right. And Covey gives examples for renewing each dimension. Exercise for the physical, meditation for the spiritual, reading for the mental, service for the social emotional.
And it's a good reminder that self-care isn't selfish.
No, it's essential.
Yeah, if we want to be effective in the long run.
And I love how he connects this habit back to all the other 6.
Oh, how so?
It's like when we're taking care of ourselves,
Uh-huh.
we have more to give.
Yeah, more capacity for everything else.
To be proactive, to build those win-win relationships, to communicate effectively, to tap into that synergy. Like, it all flows from that foundation of self-renewal.
That makes sense.
And then he introduces this idea of the upward spiral, where learning, committing, and doing, they all lead to these new levels of understanding and effectiveness.
It's like a positive feedback loop.
Yeah, each loop of the spiral takes you higher.
And that spiral is powered by sharpening the saw, that constant renewal in all those dimensions.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've gone through all 7 habits, starting with those foundations of self-mastery, all the way to those more complex, like interdependent relationships. But like, what does it all mean?
Right.
What are the key takeaways that we can actually apply in our lives? I think for me, what really sticks out is that real effectiveness, it's not about some magic formula or, quick fix.
Right.
It's about really aligning yourself with these like deeper principles of, I don't know, just human behavior. It's becoming more self-aware, more intentional, more principle-centered, in everything you do.
Yeah, and that's what I love about Covey. His work, it's so timeless.
Right.
It's not about, like, those trendy techniques or, personality hacks. It's about those foundational principles that apply to everything.
Right.
Your relationships, your work, your own personal growth.
It's like he's giving us a map, for navigating life, for being human in a way that leads to, more fulfillment, more effectiveness.
Absolutely.
But it's not a passive thing. It takes effort.
It does.
It's not always easy to challenge those old paradigms, to step outside your comfort zone, to really live those habits.
Yeah. And something I've been thinking about, like, as we've been talking about all this, it's like technology. Covey wrote this, before the internet really took off. So do you think his principles still hold up in our, like, hyper-connected world?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, we have access to more information, more tools, more connections than ever before. And that can be amazing. But it also brings a whole new set of challenges.
Oh, yeah. Like distraction.
Yeah, constantly. The pressure to be like always on, the comparison game on social media, all that stuff.
All that can pull us away from, from those principles.
It's almost like we need a new set of habits
Yeah.
to like navigate this digital world in a way that's aligned with those deeper principles.
It's not enough to just like read the 7 habits and understand the ideas.
Right.
You've got to find ways to actually apply them.
Yeah. In this world, it's like constantly changing. Yeah.
I think that's where the real work is.
That's where it gets real.
It's about being mindful, being intentional, and just constantly asking yourself, am I living by my values? Am I taking care of my goose?
Am I creating those win-win situations?
Am I truly seeking to understand others?
Yeah, it's a constant like process.
It is.
Of checking in and adjusting.
And I think that's what's so great about Covey's work.
Yeah. It's not like a one-time fix. It's a lifelong journey.
Well, I feel like we've covered a lot today,
You have.
Really unpacking those 7 habits.
Yeah.
And exploring, like, how they can help us lead those more effective, more meaningful lives.
It's been great chatting with you.
Always fun.
And remember, everyone, that power to live a more effective life, it's in you. Choose to use it wisely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the 7 habits of highly effective people.